So today we have a special guest. This is someone who you may already know from the Shopsmith community. His name is John Dalton, and his passion for Shopsmith tools runs deeper than most of us can imagine. John was one of the key people behind the get together that we had in October 2023 in Dayton. That happened to be the event where we met this young man named Nick Cups, and Bob Volkerth made the announcement that the company was being sold to Nick. And I also got to know a little bit more about John at that event and realize he's special. So, so he's got, as you will see, he has an impressive collection of Shopsmith memorabilia, things that you've never seen, store displays and packaging and clocks and stuff that even goes back to the Magna engineering era of the 1940s. And so we're going to talk about how he got started in all this, and I think that you'll enjoy this. So settle into the conversation, and let me introduce you to John Dalton. John, thanks for coming today.
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me. It's a real treat to participate.
Yeah, where are you, by the way? What part of the world?
I'm in just outside of Boston.
Gotcha. We lived just outside of Boston for a couple of years. We lived in Lowell. I worked in Chelmsford, or Chelmsford, as the locals described it.
Yeah, I think I was living in California at the time that your store was open here, and you were doing that business, because I never did visit a Shopsmith store when they were open around this area.
Okay, well, you missed out. You missed out on the sale. We had some great things you could have bought.
So I like my stuff old. If you're selling stuff from the 1950s, I would have loved it, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, okay. No, we didn't have any of that. Hey, but all that stuff is getting older by the day. So
yes.
So let's start at the very beginning, if you don't mind. What is your interest in woodworking and your connection to Shopsmith?
I'm an engineer by education. I have always loved doing things with my hands. I had a buddy of mine who taught me some of the trade that he was doing in custom cabinetry, and I just never had any tools. And then an opportunity came along to start acquiring some things, and I kind of had to do it on the cheap a little bit. And there was a woman who lived across the street from us, who was friends of my mother-in-law, who was living with us at the time. And she was living alone in an antique farmhouse, and she had a Model 10ER down in her basement that she showed me one time. She was still using it occasionally in her 80s, and that machine ended up in my hands when she ended up moving out of the house. Her family didn't want it. They offered it to me. I started pulling it apart and had a great old time, seeing how durable this thing was and restoring it. And it's my workhorse still in my garage today.
Oh, that's fantastic. When was that, roughly?
I don't know, 16, 17 years ago, I think, somewhere in that range.
And you were in California at the time?
No, that I was living back here.
You were already in Massachusetts.
Yep. So we've been back here about 30 years. So, I've
Has the Shopsmith store been closed that long? Oh, man. Thank you.
I don't.
Making me feel older than I was feeling when we started.
Yep.
So, all right. At what moment did you realize that Shopsmith was becoming more than just that tool that you have from the neighbor lady?
It was funny. After I got the machine, I didn't have any documentation on it. And subsequently, when the family finished cleaning out the house and sorting through things, they found this packet of documentation: the original owner's manual, some old Shopsmith shavings, periodicals, the manuals, the marketing materials, the brochures. And they sent it all to me, and I started looking through it, and it was like fascinating. I know that these are available to people, but if you've ever read the old Shopsmith shavings documents, you'd see, you could use your 10ER for mixing batter in the barn, or cutting that asbestos that you needed to do back in the day. They had all these great things that you could do with these machines, and I was fascinated by the way that they were marketed, the way that they were that they worked with their customers and things. So little by little, as I acquired other machines to get parts and do things, I'd get more documentation, and I learned that there was just more pieces. Started doing some collection of accessories, and then you get a little obsessed. It's like, hey, I've got these baseball cards and I want to get every one that there is. So you start saying, here's the accessories catalog. I wonder if I can find one of
Hmm.
these. Wonder if I can find one of these. And then it became more than just, can I find it? Can I find it in its original box? Because you'd find a lot of these old guys would keep these boxes around in just pristine condition for all their tools in their garage. Or, unfortunately, some guys didn't use them all that much. So those things became available. And as they did, I'd sort of add them to the collection just to,
You just re
kind of see what they were. Yeah.
you just reminded me. I do feel really kind of sad for the makers of today, the young folks that call themselves makers,
Yeah.
because what do they have to cut their asbestos with?
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So so the 10ER, were you using it for the things around the house, or were you building anything in particular? What was it that
Yeah.
got you?
I didn't have a lathe, and I had done that as a kid in shop class. And I had the best time doing that. You could just take some cheap wood, glue it together, cut it out, throw it up there, and turn something really nice. And it was just therapeutic to do it. So I did a lot of those kind of things. And then I'd use the sanding features and whatnot to allow me to, make spoons and other implements like
Mhm.
that I'd give as gifts to people. So that's the thing that I really ended up using it a lot for. Not a great table saw, as it turns out. I'd do a little bit of dado cutting and things like that on it because it was convenient to do it, easy to change the blades. And I really didn't use it so much as a drill press. I subsequently got another 10ER that I built into a dedicated drill press, and I love that. But yeah, I started to do those things, and the funny part was the thing that I would use the 10ER more than anything else was to restore other machines. It was just great to have a wire wheel on there and buff up things. I built a jig that I could do the way tubes on, and it just worked out excellent for that. And
Okay, so
yeah,
I'm afraid that if somebody were tuning in and they had no idea what we were talking about, that they may not
yep,
understand what we're saying because you're
yeah,
saying 10ER.
yep,
This is the 1947 to about 1953
3, yep,
machine that first had the name badge Shopsmith.
yep,
The company was Magna Engineering that brought that to market, and it was the Shopsmith. So
yep,
the 5-in-1 concept that we know today under the Mark V or Mark VII uh, name, the 10ER, the 10E originally, but the 10ER in real full production is what brought that to market. That is such a great tool. It is
yeah,
so beefy,
oh yeah,
and as long as you're okay with those speeds that it's able to accomplish, right?
yep, yep.
Which
Now,
is all your normal woodworking things
yeah,
anyway.
and the thing that was interesting, what's great about that platform is people worry about the safety aspects of it, but it's an open platform. You can throw any kind of a motor you want on it, and I ended up getting one that it was a DC motor that and I had a converter source, and I was able to do variable speed on that and set it up so I can run very, very slowly and very fast without any of the subsequent mechanical speed changer capabilities that they added to the machine a little bit later on in its life.
That's cheating.
Well, but that's we're facing a tough time now with the closure of Shopsmith LP, right? And
Mhm.
people are looking for, how do I keep these machines running? And there's people are going to get creative about those things as we move forward. If there doesn't turn out to be someone who picks up the company and starts it up again, so we'll have to look for people to be as creative as they can to keep these old machines running.
I agree. And I think we're already starting to see it. People that are
Yeah,
breaking out their 3D printers and saying, well,
absolutely.
maybe we can print this part.
Yep.
Yeah. So, was there a moment where you realized that your interest shifted and you became more interested in the memorabilia?
It was kind of a combination of things. I found myself restoring machines a lot and really enjoying that. And part of the thing was, sometimes to get a certain part that you really, really wanted, you had to buy the whole machine to get it along with it. Or somebody was giving away a lot of tools and you'd have to take the whole machine off their hands to get the piece that you needed. But I like to see these things go back into people's hands. I've gotten 3 or 4 of them this year already that I've had restored, and I sell them cheap to people just to get them started with the machines and keep people excited about those things.
Are you
So
selling them locally or through the
yeah,
Facebook
yeah,
sales group or?
yeah, it's just been local. I mean, it's I'm not going to ship those machines around. There's plenty of people that
Yeah,
have interest, and there's a price point there for a machine that's been polished up and is ready to go, and can be demonstrated to be in good working order. There's a price point that people will still pay for those things, and there's enough people that would have interest. And again, at a low price, you don't need to have it do all 5 of those functions.
yeah,
Sometimes sanding and lathe is good enough. Drill press is a nice little bonus, and anything else is just gravy. So
yeah.
that's enough to get people going. And it's, small form factor still. And, a lot of people are taking these older machines and converting them to shorties too, so that they're
That's right.
maybe not going to have the full lathe throw on them, or not have the width to, try to saw a full sheet of plywood. But I don't think people really realistically are doing that with these machines, the older ones anyway.
Yeah.
So, from that standpoint, it's a great little machine and an even smaller footprint.
Now, was there ever a component or an accessory that you were just on the hunt for that you hadn't seen? I know of a couple things you purchased recently, but let's just
I'm going
talk
to show
about the
you one.
standard. The standard. Oh, I know
This
what that is. Tell us
this
about it.
is one of the holy grails of. I'm gonna put it in the right orientation. This is the motor pulley cover. Some people would say it's the lower belt cover. That's the right
Yeah.
description, but as Magna described it, it's the motor pulley cover. And I know of 4 of these that exist.
Gosh,
Um, there's more out there someplace, or they may have been
sure.
separated from the machines and are sitting in some pile. It's sad because there's nothing that really describes it. There's no place on this where it says Magna or anything of that sort to give you an idea of what part number it is or where it came from. So if it got separated somehow, you probably would have no idea what this is. But
Okay, so I know where that was desired. So fill us all in. Who would want that or need it?
well, the this one came from a machine that was purchased by a shop teacher in central New York back in the early 50s. And at the time, he wanted to bring the shopsmith into his class to start teaching, his industrial arts students that kind of work. He saw it was a great machine. It filled the need that he had for that type of machine in his shop class, but state law would not allow him to do it with open belts. So this had been devised as the school guards. There was a lower saw guard that was added, and this motor pulley guard was added as well to address those shortcomings that the original system had in terms of student use of the machines. So these were really conceived for that. Um, they sold them. I've seen them in catalogs from Montgomery Ward. I finally, after a lot of searching, found a piece of paper that described from Magna kind of the whole thing that they were doing with this. But it was really hard to find those kind of things. So I don't know that they sold a lot of them, but they really were trying. And you can see from some of the literature, there was a lot of efforts that they were making to get these machines into shop classes because they wanted to, get
Yeah.
students familiar with them who would become adults who would eventually purchase these machines. So that was kind of what they were looking to do.
Is that the condition you received it in, or have you repainted that?
I repainted it. It had a couple of pretty ugly paint jobs that were done over time, that were not necessarily fully complete. So yeah, I did repaint this. I repainted and I'm redoing the rest of the machine now. I'll admit I got that machine to kind of harvest this and one other piece off. But the rest of it I'm going to put back into circulation. I'm finishing up that project now, and we'll have that off and running. It'll have a nice speed changer on it, so it'll be a very nice functional machine. And I think the
Nice.
rest of it I'm painting the same color. So this is kind of a nice tone that I find for these things.
So you're getting pretty well known, especially in the Shopsmith group on Facebook. I would say over at the Shopsmith forums, if there were
Yep.
such a place.
Yeah, I spent a lot. It was funny. I put together something. This was kind of again when people were stuck and maybe inside a little bit with COVID, and I had a lot of these pieces around, and I said, well, it might be kind of fun to start to showcase some of these things and share it because
Yeah.
I sit here in my office at home and I get to enjoy this stuff, but I don't often get to show anyone any of these things. I don't have a lot of people that I know who have interest who will come by and see it.
Yeah.
So I said, I wanted to share it somehow. And I started up a share your Shopsmith memorabilia or your Magna memorabilia. And got, it ran for over 3 years. I'm sure there were a
Yeah.
lot of bots that were checking this out, but there were 3 million page views on it. We
Goodness.
had, hundreds of articles that were done on it. So I was pretty proud of that. And I just kept trying to bring new things and not just
Yeah.
show the item, but say, what's the significance of it? Like this lower, this motor pulley guard. I told the whole story of the gentleman because he had all the documentation he had with the machine was saved. So I got to find a little bit of history of him. And he was actually an interesting character. He turned out he was there's an award named for him from one of the State University of New York campuses that he was associated with because he had a long, long tenure as a shop teacher. I think both at the high school level and the college level. So it was kind of interesting to see that, find this gentleman, get a little bit of history on what he had done. And I tried to share those kind of things with people and say, it's not just an artifact. Here it is. This
Yeah.
is how it fits in the scheme of things, and here's the story behind this individual one. I find that a lot of fun to do, to kind of sleuth those things out.
I recall in the last few months before the forum shut down, you had been putting out something every specifically the tool of the month. And
Right. It
and
was this
and
month in Shopsmith history. That was the last one
I
that
loved it.
I kind of started that up. It was, hey, I started it in the summer, and the first thing I think I put up was, here's an announcement. I found it in an old employee newsletter. This is something Everett Davis had purchased some point on
The magpie.
the Magpie newsletters for the employees, and he scanned them and he put them up. I don't know how many people will read those kind of things, but I started reading through, and there was an announcement in August of 1954. They said, "Hey, August 15th." 1954, it's our 7th anniversary. So I said, aha, now I know when Magna Engineering Corporation was founded. It was August 15th of 1947, not too long after they started delivering those machines to Montgomery Ward. So just, little facts like that sort of add to some of the knowledge base and the timeline. A lot of this information is out there, but it's kind of fragmented. Until you read a few things and get all the pieces, you don't see how it all fits together.
Well, that event that you were so pivotal in getting set up back in 2023, that
Yep.
was an anniversary, right? Did you
Yes.
know that in advance of finding that notification
Well, that
in the
was
newsletter? Or
yeah, that was kind of why I, kind of pushed the button and got the project started because I said, hey, it's the 75th anniversary of the release of the original 10E. That's worthy of a
only
celebration.
happens one time, right?
Yeah, let's.
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? There's a lot of older gentlemen who are in our, our group of users, and they may not be around for the 100th anniversary. So let's get everyone together now. And I knew the Folkerth family from having visited the facility sort of on my own a couple of years prior to that. So I reached out to some folks and said, "Does this sound feasible? Is it something we could do?" And eventually, we were able to put all that together.
Excellent. Now, you were telling me before we turned the camera on here
Yep.
about that the news that the company was being sold and that was coming up as that event was taking shape, right?
Yeah, I
And
and I only knew it subsequently because I had no visibility into that occurring, but there was something kind of mysteriously happened where the owners of Shopsmith sort of become a lot more enthusiastic about supporting this, and they were a lot more generous about supporting it too. And I subsequently come to find out that this was sort of the coming out party for the new ownership that was taking that opportunity to have some of these people gathered there that weekend to announce the new ownership, the change of ownership, and what the plan was moving forward.
yeah, which has changed now.
Yeah, yeah, it's unfortunate. It was a yeah, yeah. I, I don't know all the background with that. It's a tough thing to be in. It's
Yeah.
I know as a person who works with the older machines, who collects the older machines, it's one of those things I come to realize is there's a lot of the older machines around, and it's tough to build a business building new machines when there's so much stock of old machines around. So I don't know all the details of what occurred. Obviously, we're in challenging economic times with different tariff issues and things like that.
Hmm.
So there may be some things related to that, but at the end of the day, they were making 10 15,000 of these machines a year back in the day. I think some of the peak numbers that I read in a business plan that sort of cited some old records talked about as many as 25,000 machines being made a year. And when you've got
Mm.
that kind of volume, you can be very creative in terms of the subcontractors that you get and the things that you need to get together to build those machines. Here, that volume wasn't anywhere near that now. I mean, I know that they
Yeah.
were ramping things up, but you're talking volumes in probably hundreds, not thousands, and certainly not tens of thousands. So that
Yeah.
was a difficult situation that they had.
Yeah. So what are some of the things, and maybe we should pan the room and kind of get a scope for what you have here.
Okay.
I particularly want to know, besides the belt cover, that maybe some of the items that you said to yourself, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe I found this." Things that you had been looking for a while. So can you,
Yeah. I'm going to kind of break for a minute. Should I push this thing
yeah,
back and give myself
do
pan a little bit?
whatever you got to do. We'll edit it out.
My computer's being finicky. I'm coming across smooth on your end, okay?
I wonder if it's your lenticular badge is throwing the camera off.
Oh,
I'm only partially joking. But
yeah, I
for,
can pull it off if
no,
that's.
I don't think you need to do that, John. But while we're talking about
Yep.
it, what is your, tell us about your badge?
So, I love to, as I collected various accessories, boxed accessories, documents, and things. I started stumbling on things that were more related to, what people were doing who were selling the machines, and I became fascinated with that. And it was surprising to see how much of that stuff was still out there, what survived. And this was an example of that, where there was a big emphasis in the early days of Shopsmith, and you ran one of the stores. You probably had a similar kind of approach. Demonstrate the machine. You demonstrate the
Yes.
machine. People want that machine. They'll get it, and they'll want to buy it. And that was something that they had a philosophy on from the get go of the systems. And they'd encourage the local hardware stores demo the machines. And this was just one
Right.
of those things where you'd have the Shopsmith logo, and it would say, "Ask me for a demonstration." So this was just like a kitschy little item that you'd wear if you were working in a hardware store that was selling these things. And they sold them not only through the Montgomery Ward national retailer, but mom and pop hardware stores all over the country. They had hundreds and hundreds of retailers that they worked with. So this was just an example of that. And I've got a few more items here, and hopefully we'll have a minute. We can walk you through some of those things and
Yeah.
some of the stuff that people would use when they were selling these.
So I have two different buttons. One that says "Ask me to make sawdust," and we
Okay.
wore those in the retail
Yep.
stores.
Yep.
And the other one that had a silhouette of the Mark V, and it simply said, "How many years?"
Ah, okay.
And it was, especially at the live trade show events, it was a great way to figure out if someone was actually an owner of Shopsmith equipment or if they were
Yep.
a prospect. Because
Yep.
the owners
Yep.
would tell you, "Oh, I bought mine here 3 years ago," or I've
Yeah.
had one for so many years.
Yep.
Uh, so okay, you backed off a little bit. We're seeing some
Yes.
things around you. What are we seeing?
Yes. So I got a few different things that I wanted to show here. I mean, when it comes to things that, gee, I can't believe that I got this. A boxed set of the safety goggles, and I made
Okay.
a kind of a point that you see all these pictures of these guys working these woodworking machines. Nobody ever seemed to wear safety goggles back then. They had them. They sold them to customers, and it was kind of funny because I said, "Hey, you'd simultaneously say people did care about safety, but recognize that they really didn't care about safety because they were kind of still new in the box. You'd buy them, but you never actually used them. So, that was a kind of an item. I'd also, it wasn't just the Model 10E and 10ER and the Mark Fives. they had other machines that they built too. Mark II was an example of one of those machines. And this, when you talk about certain items that are a rare item from a rare machine, it's kind of like that double thing that's very hard to find, and something that's actually in its original envelope. And this is this is the dado insert that would go into the Mark II table. Really flimsy kind of stuff, and unfortunately, that was really the truth of any of the items that you saw associated with the Mark II. Flimsy items like this. And they were trying to do a really low cost, low entry item for people to get into the Mark world. And yeah, this just didn't quite hit the mark. But
But
finding something like this.
that has a very unique shape,
Yep.
and something that later was brought back for the
Yeah.
Mark 5,
Yep.
510, 520, Mark
Yep.
7. And
Yeah.
that is, instead of being that pill shape, the insert just goes all the way off the back of the table.
Yep.
Is that
Yep.
also true of the table saw that they produced, the Magnaline table saws?
Yes. So I know you have one of those. I've got one that I've restored up. I found a couple of other of those inserts. I think it was also dado inserts that were in box and new, and that was kind of one of their early innovations that they had. Was they said, "Hey, we don't want you to catch on the back of the insert." Like you could theoretically in a Mark V table, the early Mark V tables,
Yeah,
and the 10ER, if you didn't have that thing aligned just correctly. So
that's
they
right.
said, here's a good idea we could do with this. I'm not sure if they really were trying, if it was just like, hey, this is the best we can do with this flimsy material, or if it was, something else and they just stumbled on it. But yeah, that was a design that I think that they used a little bit later. Um,
Yeah.
this is stuff I love to find too. This is the WD-40 of the day, branded as Shopsmith, made by Magna Engineering, well, at least labeled by Magna Engineering Corporation. So, finding these things that I call consumable items is really difficult to find. I mean, there are things like these sprays and the adhesives for the sanding discs, and actually the distich that you would use as an alternative to a liquid glue to put that on. All these kind of things that you'd say, hey, I would use them up, and then I'd throw them away when they were empty because it'd get
Yeah.
consumed. But some of these survive. There's a surprising amount of material still in this. I hope it's going to stay in there for a few years.
What is that one? Is
This
that
one's
motor
just
oil?
this is just a rust preventative spray. So yeah, this was, like I said, the WD-40 of the day.
It really, you said
Yeah.
so, yeah.
Yeah, if you could, just spray this on to keep things lubricated. Again, I think most of us who have some experience with Shopsmith, I know I'll use some WD-40 when I'm tearing a machine apart, but I generally will never use that kind of stuff as I'm putting it back together.
That's right.
I'm using wax more than anything on a lot of parts, or maybe some other kind of dry lube. But yeah, this stuff I won't use on any of those things. I use it to cut through some of the things that I have to clean up on items, but that's the kind of stuff that I'll find. This was an interesting one. I got this one not too long ago. You really can't tell much, and I don't want to unpack this one, but it's a key switch and outlet box that you could add to an old Mark V. And there's some interesting. It was one of these. Hey, if you've ever torn apart one of these old machines, there's a bar that sort of holds the bench tubes into the castings that are at the ends of the bench portion of this, above the legs. And there's always two holes in there, and there never seemed to be any reason for those holes to exist. This thing actually would bolt to that and allow you to have a plug that would only work through a key switch in it to keep a little bit more safety on one of these things. I think people devised a couple different ways to do that. One other thing I was going to show here too, I'd like to do maybe a close-up on this. This looks, if you say, well, that's nothing big, John. That's a Mark V miter gauge, right? With the accessory handle. Except this is Powercraft on it, and this was actually made again. I don't know if people realize in the Magna days how many tools that they made for Powercraft that were branded as Powercraft. I know they sold Mark V's and 10ERs through Montgomery Ward stores, but they made a lot of things from their own sort of portfolio of tools and
Hmm.
branded them specifically as Powercraft. If people liked the Powercraft brand and didn't trust Shopsmith for whatever, or but in this particular case, it says Powercraft on here. This is from the Powercraft branded equivalent of the standalone Magnaline table saw. It's got a different kind of bar. There's none of the typical hole and slot that you'd see in a Mark V miter gauge, and that was because it was not meant to work on that table. It's thicker because the table on those standalone table saws is steel, not aluminum, like you'd see typically with the Mark V tables. And that was two reasons. Number one, you weren't it was not a tilt table, it was a tilt arbor kind of saw, so you weren't having to move that table and you weren't picking up and pulling it off. So the table on the table saw is pretty heavy and pretty beefy steel, so it's held up really well over time. But they changed the bar design around that as well as they went and did that. So one last thing I'll show too, this is kind of different. This is a 9-inch sanding disc. People have seen obviously that this 12-inch. There's a variety of 12-inch types that were made at various points in time, but there were also 10-inch ones that ended up on the old Mark VII, the 1960s version Mark VII. But this is a 9-inch one, and this was specifically for the Sawsmith RAS that was marketed by Yuba and by Magna American back in the day. So it's not, this is a really interesting to see. This was never used. Again, it was an accessory that somebody bought with a machine. I bought the whole machine, but kind of, tucked this in with some of the memorabilia because I thought it was such a unique piece. And I'm not going to be using that saw for
Do
something a
you
little bit different.
do you know, John, is that the conical disc? Is that the one that they
Um,
also put on
this
the Mark VII?
there is a conical disc. I've got one in the display case over there. This I don't believe is. I believe it was just a
Okay.
flat one, but I'd have to. It's been a while since I pulled this one
Don't
out, so we'll I
don't
can do that a little bit later if it makes sense.
yeah. Don't worry about that.
So
Okay. So flanking you, you've got what look like displays.
yes, what would you like to see?
Everything.
All right. I'm to introduce a couple of the things that I want to show. I just wanted to show one particular item. This looks
Okay.
fairly innocuous. And if you didn't spend a lot of time reading through old vendor brochures and things, you wouldn't know what this was. But I saw it pop up on eBay and it said, I know what it is, I want it. And this was basically a customer resource management tool. It was sort of your Salesforce.com of the 1950s, and it was a bunch of index cards that you would write information on prospects, and then subsequently Shopsmith owners, because number one, you wanted to make sure you could market to these people when there was potential for them to buy a new machine, and then once they did, their statistics were very strong that said, they'll come back and they'll buy, we're talking again, an era when a machine was $300, and that was a brand new Mark V was $300. And then they'd say within a year, they will probably come back and buy $100 worth of accessories from you. So you had to keep track of these people and keep marketing. So this was an example of one of the things that became, one of the items that you'd associate with the hardware stores that were selling these to local prospects. So I became intrigued with some of those items somewhere along the line, and I'll show you a couple that I've managed to salvage from some pretty tough circumstances to be able to keep them preserved and be able to display them and show them for subsequent work. Two really interesting items here. I found this one in a barn in Davenport, Iowa, last year. There was a fellow that I had done some communications with based on some articles that I'd posted on Shopsmith forums back in the day. And he said, I have one of these things. It's just sitting in my barn. It needs to go. if I can find someone who could take it from me, I'd be happy to give it to them. So I happen to have a business trip that took me out to Chicago that was in spitting distance of Davenport, Iowa. I got myself a rental car. I headed out to his place. He was a very nice gentleman. We shared a couple of stories about our experience with Shopsmiths, and he told me a bit of where this came from. It was in really rough shape when I first got it. Just to give you an idea, the signage that was on it, the original signage was this, pretty rough
Uh,
shape. So I decided I'm going to bring it back. I stripped it all down. I tried to clean up the wooden parts as best I could. I repainted by hand some of the pieces that were pretty tough and beat up with rust. Sealed everything up, repainted the grill, redid the artwork, bolted everything back together, and I have this nice little display piece. And hardware stores would use this when you would walk in. Actually, the artwork was meant to be on the back side as well. So no matter where you kind of walked in from the
uh,
hardware store, you would see this thing. You'd come over. It was a place that you could store the accessories when you were giving a demo. And that's how they approached this. A sister piece that went with it was this accessories rack. And this one, I took a long drive out, I think Labor Day weekend, to Buffalo, New York, from my home in the Boston area. It was a good long drive, but I literally had this as a barn find. I had to pluck this out of a barn. A gentleman had acquired this some years ago, stored some tools on it, and after that, he really didn't have any specific things that he needed to do with it. So, he was trying to clean out some things from there. It was in pretty crummy shape. I cleaned up and polished the metal, repainted the some of the boards. These are kind of interesting, the way they managed to get this material to bend. And I didn't want to try to recreate that material, so I worked hard to make sure I could salvage that they had. And again, this rotates around. I only have a few accessories on here right now because I just haven't had
yeah.
time to load up everything. But I have some pictures and some manuals or some dealer brochures that kind of show it, at least a couple of the sides of it all done. So that's how I've got these. So I've like I said, I've collected these items just because they're really hard to find. They're really unique, and it's great to be able to preserve it and sort of give that ambiance of a 1950s hardware store. I
So
remember walking through places like that in the 60s with my dad when I was a youngster. And I just love the look and feel of those kind of things.
I agree with you on that. So that display, the rotary display, would
Yep.
it have displayed a single item and then they would have had items in boxes on the shelf somewhere, or were people purchasing off of the rack? Do you
Oh
recall?
no, this was purely for display.
For display. Okay.
Yep. So it was filled with virtually. I mean, and you'll see as I show you some of the other things, some of the other, the
Yeah.
variety of accessories that came with these things. Yeah, they had it all lined up in there, and you remember there was, all kinds of different bits and pieces that you could add on here. The different inserts into the table, all these kind of things, and they'd even start to list things like those consumable items, like I talked about, the lubricating spray and things like that. Were all you'd
Yeah.
find them here on this. Get a little description of them and say, "Aha, I need one of these. I need one of these." I remember, in fact, when we were at the Maker event in Dayton last year in the spring. It was, that was one of those things that I wanted to see the Shopsmith team be able to do a little bit better, was have more of those things out on display, because there's nothing quite like having something right in front of you. You probably remember this from your days in the store. You have those
Yep.
things right in front when people would say, "I want one of those." And I did buy some things, from one of the other vendors that was there. He showed it to me. I saw it. I said, "I want one of those." And, that's how those transactions would happen. But it
Yep.
was definitely, an approach that they like to take in the hardware store. It's like, yeah, the hardware store would have to pay for this display loaded up with these things. But it was kind of the cost of doing business, but they showed them that, yeah, if you have these things there, people will say, "I want it," and they'll buy it. And that would give you your best chance to market to those people.
This is a Mark
Um,
Five. This is Mark
yes,
Five, right? This is a Mark Five
yes,
display.
Yeah,
So
this
this
is all
is
my
mid
product.
50s.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, you may notice on this too that there's a Power Pro there's a Power Pro motor in that. This is my Mark V that I created for myself, and I did it with the intention of trying to put one of the modern motors in, and that's a legitimate 1954 machine, and that Power Pro motor went right into that headstock, no problem. So I use that as my model because I didn't have any other photographs, so I just used my own machine to do that with.
That's great.
So anyway,
Those smocks kill me. I
yeah,
remember wearing one of the red smocks during the Shopsmith Inc. era,
yep,
and it's just so ridiculous. We had to wear a tie and a
yep.
smock to demonstrate this equipment, and it's like
Ah, now I have,
so unsafe.
I,
Oh, that's
I,
it. Yep,
I have
yep.
one of the red smocks.
Uh,
I do, but I tend to keep the things a little. I mean, those aren't to me quite vintage enough, so
no,
I don't
no.
necessarily show them. But I'll kind of zoom in a little bit here. I'll get down a little bit so we can see some of that stuff. So anyway, um, before there was the display for the Mark V, there was a similar kind of display, a little bit more crude, for in-store demonstrations for the 10ER. And it had slots for all the pieces. So again, as you're doing the demonstration, you'd swap things in, swap things out as you needed to do that. I put in, sometimes I use these as just an interesting place to show certain types. This is a really unusual sanding disc, because there was a period of time at the early time of the 10E that they made this really heavy duty. This weighs about twice as much as a normal. It is aluminum, but the normal sanding disc, and it was kind of a crude casting. You can kind of see they had to balance it out a little bit with some extra holes in here, and
Yeah.
subsequently they made a much more elegant one that generally did not require any kind of balancing. I think they got a little bit better at the casting, or the subcontractor that they got a little bit more sophisticated about that. But I'll use these things to display some unique pieces like this that somebody might want to see. This, for example, is the miter gauge for a 10E. It's different, a little more crude than what you saw with the 10ER. The 10ER became a little bit more sophisticated, but this was with a machine that I got and was actually in really good condition. So I just polished it up a little bit and put that here. And here's an example of the 10E table fence with the accessory piece that would provide the rear hook that wasn't part of the original design. I'm not sure how they figured that these table fence would stay in place very well, but the 10E originally did not come with that rear hook. Only had sort of the front grip on
Wow.
the front of the table, but they subsequently put these on. It just made it a little bit more difficult that certain items that you might want to bolt on here, that it became a little bit less easy to do that. But they did start to put in the mortising hole down. That became a feature that they added to here as well. So a few of these things that I add on here that seem to come up really nicely. This is one of my favorite pieces right here. I think this is kind of one of the things that got me interested in the whole hardware store aspect of things. That lighted display, it originally had a big fluorescent fixture, super heavy. I put in a nice LED round fixture in it, and it runs, not nearly so hot as it used to. And I'll have a nice glow of that Shopsmith logo here in my office. And then I think we talked a little bit about before some of these garments that they used back in the day. And I've got an interesting picture I can show if you want to see it at some point, that is this type of a garment being worn by a hardware store representative at a trade show back in the mid 50s. So again, when you were selling these things at a trade show, you had that great big beautiful Shopsmith logo on your back, nice blue trim on the collars and the cuffs, and these long smocks, lab coats, however you want to call them, that people would use for that.
That
Um,
looks like you're about ready to get into the boxing ring with Delta or
yeah, yeah, yeah,
Craftsman.
yeah, exactly. Something else I think is kind of interesting too. I've managed to find a few of these things, and these were confidential dealer manuals. So basically, if you were somebody who was selling Mark Fives back in the 1950s, you would, get this information that would talk to you about here's our pricing policies. Some of the documentation are things we'd already be familiar with, but there were some interesting things like here where you'd see this is the utility display. It would describe it to the dealer and say, you should buy one of these things. This is how I've got to know some of these things that I've sought out later. It's like, hey, this existed at one point. I wonder if I can find one. So when they pop up someplace, I've actually been able to see this original documentation that would say, this is what it is, this is why it existed, and a little bit about it. In fact,
Nice.
I used this one here. I was concerned that I was about trying to get this thing back home with me because I couldn't carry it with me. I had to ship it. So I had to know about how big it was. I had to know how big a rental car I needed after I broke it down to put it in. And I was able to estimate that based on this, 12-inch sanding disc that was here. So I just kind of said, I think it's about this big. And I was pretty close to the right dimensions and all that worked out. But, this is some great
That's
information too,
awesome.
just to see how they would market these machines. And I've got a number of these from various eras. There's even one in here for the Sawsmith, very similar kind of format, but was done specific to that.
All
Um,
right. And then
you
back
want to see?
behind you, when we first got on before we started recording,
Yep.
I immediately noticed the green thing in the corner because you
Ah,
don't see those intact very
yes,
often.
yes, yeah. This is the belt cover to a Mark II. Um, it's the
Gosh.
same material that was used on the covers for the bandsaws, but much flimsier. Everything about the Mark II was meant to be low cost. So any
Yeah.
place that could cut corners on things, they did. They went back to a model of, you can see in here that this is kind of the pulley arrangements for the various speeds that you could acquire
Yeah.
with a Mark II. They went back to kind of that 10ER model of, hey, just swap the belts around and this will work for you. This unfortunately got some damage in transit. I managed to sort of stitch it back together, but it's not in very good shape. So I just kind of left it as a display piece. Um,
Yeah, they all seem to be either be broken or they would get mispositioned in use and the pulleys
yes.
would burn a hole
Yeah.
right
Yeah.
through them.
Yeah. I've seen plenty of those kind of things too. Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, this is something that, it's a little bit heavy, but you may not see too often. This
Oh
is
gosh.
the compressor. And I set it up with a belt cover on over the pulley. But this is a compressor that you could buy as an accessory to a Mark V. This is quite heavy, this whole unit. Pretty solid material. It wasn't made by Magna. It was made by Decora Manufacturing Company. So it was just something that they had branded. I've always looked to see if I could find one that was this same thing that was not a Magna sprayer. But I've never seen one of that sort. So I'm not sure if they made these exclusively for Magna to be used on these
Hmm.
machines. But they sold these during the Yuba days, so you could get these as a Goldie. I don't remember when they stopped making them. If the Magna American
Yeah.
guys also had them making them, but this is kind of an
Yeah.
interesting piece that
John,
once it's
John,
cleaned up.
tell us about the tank. What's the tank that came with that sprayer?
Oh, oh, oh. Well, there was no tank. It was tankless, so it would run constantly. I mean, this is the sprayer piece that would go with it.
Yeah,
So that's the only tank
but
piece that you get with it.
well, no. What was connecting the sprayer, the compressor
Yep.
with the gun? That flexible thing was
Yep.
your tank.
I,
Okay,
the
I'll
what they
give it to you.
came.
It's a garden hose.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
It
yeah.
it
Okay. Yep.
worked with a garden hose,
Yep.
and the capacity of your garden hose was your tank.
Yep. So you can see here, this is the original hose that came with it, and it had a coupler like this that would work. And yes, you could, connect up if you wanted to. If you said, "Hey, this hose is not long enough. I need to make this 100 feet long," you could literally connect a garden hose in between with this coupler,
Yeah,
and it would get you there with that. So yeah, it was that
crazy.
it was kind of the thing that every man could use, and that was how
Yeah.
they set it up. So it would work that way. um, so again, I don't, you can see a few of the items here that are in the display case. These are where I've kept a lot of my boxed items. I'll use an example of one that's a kind of a neat one I pulled out before. This is the speed changer from the Model 10ER, and this is a brand new, never was used, in the box speed changer. It
Wow.
has the tags still on the belts. I don't know why someone would buy this and then not choose to use it, but there are those stories out there. Every once in a while, you'd find someone who would, I've heard of guys who said, "Yeah, a buddy I know found a Model 10 still in its original shipping crate, never had
Oh
been
my.
used." Maybe a gentle. I've heard these stories, unfortunately, where someone made a purchase, they passed away before they got a chance to actually put it together, sat in the widow's barn for a long, long time, and then subsequently somebody came and found it. So,
Yeah.
some of those things do exist, but I found a few of these kind of things like that, that kind of got me started. The thing that actually got me started with sort of the boxed accessories more than anything was, this was, boy, 6 years ago now. I saw something on eBay, and it was the pieces, and I've got one here that I can show you. These are some brackets that you would put on a 10ER. Um, this is the tube size of the 10ER, but then it would adapt for Mark V accessories. So you could say, "Hey, I want a bandsaw on my old 10ER," and at the time there were 150,000 users of 10ERs out there. So they said, "We don't want to have those guys not be able to buy our bandsaw or our belt sander or
Yeah.
things of that sort." So they said, "We made these brackets," and I had a set of these brackets complete in box. It was used, but lightly used, with the special pulley that would go on. I have an example of which here, would have a piece that you could, put your coupler on directly with that. So you'd replace your original pulley with this, cut a hole in your belt cover if you wish to do so, and you could then put the coupler on, and you could run this off the back. If you had one of those bracket sets. And I just bought this bracket set from a gentleman. I said, "This is a really neat thing." And then it's like, "Hey, I bet there are more of these original in box accessories out there that I can find at some point." So I started
Uh,
seeking those out as well. So
Very
um,
cool.
let's see, a couple more things. I'm going to turn this around, and you can decide
Yeah.
if you want to keep this
Oh yeah. Oh
material
yeah.
or not. As I started to collect more, you know, unusual kind of items, this is something that came to my attention. It was the Magnaline catalog, and you see some things on there that look really familiar. You see, the bandsaw. You see the belt sander. You see the compressor that we were just looking at before, and you'd see all the standard single purpose tools or special purpose tools that would be part of this. And basically, I think there was a thought at Magna that, hey, there's a market for people who want single standalone tools that won't necessarily buy an all-in-one tool like a Shopsmith, but they want our bandsaw, they want our belt sander. Let's give them to them. And they kind of started up this notion of the Magnaline. And they added some things on there, and like this is a great example of the standalone table saw. So they'd have a table saw. They subsequently came out with another line, and I found a little catalog that talked about this at one point. They called it the Thrifty Three. They wanted to say, hey, we can make some of these other items and make them on the cheap, so you could get yourself a belt sander for $35. I mean, just ridiculously low prices on some of these things. you'd have to kind of come up with your own stand and your own motor, but the tool itself was very inexpensive. But these were examples of these kind of things, and one of the things that they did is this setup here, where they'd say, "Hey, if you have a couple of our tools, but you don't have a Mark V, use this stand, put a motor on it, and away you go. You've got power for a couple of different SPTs, and you can run those things as you need to." This is just an example that I found this with, gosh, what did it have with it? I think it had one of these guys with it that I think I've subsequently sold off to somebody. But I really wanted this stand to kind of see what it was. And it was in pretty tough shape. I stripped it down, repainted it, cleaned it all up, polished all the hardware. I added some casters to it. And I've actually found another one of these since then. This one, I'm not sure if we can see it at this point, but this has an unusual sort of spring-loaded motor mount at the bottom. And I do have a motor on here that has, two spindles off it, and it will come, and I can put pulleys on either side and run two SPTs at the same time. At some point, I'll get that motor cleaned up and probably have this thing in running order, but it's just for display purposes right now. One other item I think is a little bit interesting. I'll pull this off the wall just so I can give you a better look at it. There's a phonograph.
Oh gosh, you beat me. I was bidding on this.
Yeah, this is a phonograph record, and it turns out I wasn't quite sure what it was. It says Shopsmith Mark V on it. It's from 1955. I said, okay, that looks cool. So why wouldn't I get it? This is a sales training, as it turns out. So this is the audio for the sales training. I think there was a film strip that went with it. If those of us who are old enough to remember film strips from school when we were kids, you'd get to you'd have an audio track running, and you get a beep in the middle of that, and that would mean advance the film strip to the next slide. There was no PowerPoint back then, but this was that. I did have my son, who runs a recording studio here in the house. Luckily, no band is playing right now because it could get a little bit loud. He transferred this and digitized it for me, cleaned up the audio because it had a lot of clicks and things on it. And I did post it up at one point. It's on my it's on a share drive in my Dropbox, I believe. And for people that might have interest in hearing that audio, it's available. I can get the link available for people if they want to tune in on it. So just another
we should
nice
share that.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm not joking. I was bidding against some
Oh
guy
yeah,
who was just, and I think you sniped me.
yeah, yeah. Well, some of these things, everyone's got their own strategy for how they work on eBay, and I know that some things I'll say I'm not going to lose with it. When I bought that table saw, there was one other guy who it was an estate auction, and there was one other guy who clearly wanted it, and he and I were bidding, and it got ridiculously expensive for an old table saw. An old table saw is worth $50. That's the truth. And I paid a lot more for it because I said, I want that piece. So, I got that. I've restored it. It's in beautiful working order. It's a great machine. I did find, and you and I were talking about this just today, I picked up, there was a standalone drill press that was made by Magna as part of the Magnaline tool set. You didn't see it typically in the catalogs, unfortunately, but they did make it. And I just got one of those today. It's in, as you'd expect, a little bit rough shape, but I'll get it back up to snuff, and it'll look great and it'll run great because, again, these machines probably will last forever. They'll certainly outlast me. And I have one more that I've got to restore. Unfortunately, our late friend Ed Mallon, who he acquired an old 30-inch lathe, standalone lathe that was, again, part of the Magna line. He sold that to me some time ago, and I still have that to restore, and I'll certainly do that in his memory.
That's awesome. Yeah, there was a benchtop jointer. Maybe it was a part of the three tools that you were talking about, but it's funny how those castings look just like the bases that you have under those SPTs.
Yep.
And the base of your drill press has a very similar shape to it. So
yeah, similar shape. That one's a lot more robust. These are they are just the standard SPT stands that are bolted to this frame.
Yeah.
That's how they made it.
Yep.
So yeah, if you bought this frame, you got the two SPT stands that would go with it. One I'd love to find at some point is you could take this kind of a stand and extend it out a little bit further to mount both a table saw and a jointer on the same item, but you needed
Yeah.
another accessory kit to do that. So that one I've never run into. That's going to be a little bit hard to find. Maybe I'll find it someday.
If any man's gonna find one,
Yeah, I
it's gonna
did
be
want to.
you.
I did want to show one kind of an oddball thing
Yeah.
because this is one that is going to be maybe on my list for what can I see in the future. This is kind of my
Oh,
potentially what do I see
yes.
in the future. I hope this is coming out well here. It's a little bit maybe hard to see. This is a salesman's sample of a very large machine that Magna made for a period of time. This was surprisingly, I found some documentation on this and some news articles on it. This surprisingly was something that they were selling during the early 10ER period. This came out in like 1950 or 1951. I would have thought that as they were branching out into tools with like the Magnaline later on in their history, that this machine would have been made. But this was actually made back at that time, and it was an industrial drilling machine that
Yeah.
they called the Magna drill. That's kind of my next quest. If I can actually find one of those in a junkyard someplace of the actual full-size machine, it might be kind of a fun project to try to restore
So,
it.
John, for the longest time, I thought that was only ever made as a salesman sample, but I have since seen pictures of one in use.
Yeah.
And if you rotate that 90 degrees, you can see the base casting of the base has the Magna logo on it.
Oh, yep. I'm sorry. Yep.
And at the factory, there's one or two of those stands in use still today in Dayton.
Wow. Wow. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
interesting. There were some if you look in those old Magpie employee newsletters that we talked about before,
Yeah.
there is actually some information in there that talks about folks who are selling those machines, and one that was in use at the time with a company called Lear. And this was an early part of, I think it was, back when it was sort of Lear electronics of some sort. I think they were making, I'm not exactly sure what they were making in the electronic space, where they had some big, maybe stators or something like that that had to get drilled out. I'm not sure what they were doing, but it was the gentleman who subsequently started the Learjet company. So, before Learjet came along, and an interesting kind of, everyone knows everyone. I don't know if you have ever mentioned Tony Fox in any of your subsequent or in your prior videos, but Tony was an old Magna employee at some point, branched out on his own, made his own Fox super shop.
Yep.
And he was like an inventor of everything. He was inventing a small business jet himself, the Fox jet, that seemed like it was kind of feasible, except he kind of lost access to the engine that he had designed around because it was being used for some military applications. And the Department of Defense said, nope, you can't use that anymore. So he never quite got that off the ground, no pun intended. But that's a little bit of that history of all these people who've kind of been associated with the Shopsmith name and whatnot over time.
Now that's a neat sample that you have there. Dave Folkerth, who unfortunately is deceased now, but John's youngest son, he had one of those samples and sold it on eBay.
Yep.
Do you know, is that the one that you purchased, or could it have been passed on yet to?
There's one more that's out there, and it's with a shop in Chicago that sells industrial artifacts. I think they call them, that might even be what they call themselves, industrial artifacts. And they were selling it on eBay like a year or two ago for like $2,000.
Yeah.
And then their price was like $3,000 or something like that at the store later. They've dropped it down a little bit now, but it's still like, I don't think they're going to find anyone to buy that. So it's,
you'll be able to, once you find a genuine Magna drill, you'll be able to pick it up for less than that.
I hope so. I hope so.
Yeah.
The challenge will just be getting it back here. Some of these things are pretty big, but I think that one will be a little bit oversized.
So are there any other people like you? Are you the only guy that has this disease, or are you aware of other fans of Shopsmith memorabilia
You know,
out there?
I know some folks. Russ Chapman, who has been a big contributor to the Shopsmith forums over the years.
Yeah.
He was a guy that, he was a great wealth of information on some of these things. Told me a little bit about some things, and sort of pointed me in the right direction. He owns some things, but not to the extent that I have collected them. He's a guy who has acquired, surprisingly enough, there was a lot of folklore about the early 10E machines and the first 250 that were delivered to Montgomery Ward stores in November of 1947 for the Christmas sale. And that was kind of the launch of the company. Those machines, for whatever reason, were disproportionately distributed to the Pacific Northwest. And he owns three of them, three of that
Oh,
original
wow.
250. They still exist. He's found them. He's restored them. I'm not sure if any of them are going to be, cast off or sent off to or sold off to, some people that he's looking for, or if he's keeping them all himself. But yeah, he's done some great sleuthing around some old documents and things like that. And of course, Everett Davis is a guy that has done a lot of work. He was the one that managed to scan some of Hans Goldschmidt's original old files that ended up in
Yeah.
Dayton at some point. And we have him to thank for giving access to scans of a lot of those things that he's cleaned up at various points. And the owner's manual that I have for this 12.5-inch drill that I bought earlier today is courtesy of Everett. So this, he's done some things.
Fantastic.
In fact, I think he's the gentleman that owns. There is a picture that has been shown for years of Bob Chambers, who was partners with Hans Goldschmidt and his brother Frank Chambers, that is, that started up Magna. And I think for the 10,000th 10ER that came off the assembly line, they created a gold-plated one that they showed at trade
Was
shows
it
and things.
gold or
I'm
chrome?
sorry, chrome. I
It is
said gold,
chrome.
and I meant chrome plated.
Say, wow.
Yeah, and there is, but it's out there, and I think Everett managed to acquire it.
I think
In
so
fact,
too.
that was again another Tony Fox connection, because I think it ended up in his hands at some point. He gave it to someone, sold it to someone, and Everett ended up buying it. So he's got that in his collection. So there's some really cool things
Wow.
out there from some other people. I've kind of, with the breadth of things that I've found and put in one place, I may be a little bit more a little bit more on the edge than some of those folks in terms of things that I've looked for.
Now you're a young man. You're going to be around for a while.
Yeah.
But have you thought about what's going to happen to these things eventually? Your son interested in them, or you going to start a museum, or what's the plan?
I'm looking at any kind of option that I might have. I don't think any of my sons would have the interest to keep and display these things. But I got to figure out what to do with them, because
Yeah.
I'm leery of various museums, because they'll say, yeah, well, if you want to donate stuff, we'll acquire it, and then it goes in boxes in the back room.
Right.
It'll be sitting back there with the Ark of the Covenant, right, from
Yeah.
Indiana Jones. I just
Yeah.
don't want to see the stuff end up in that kind of a situation.
Yeah.
But it's become something that I really enjoy seeing and whatnot. So I think it's kind of an interesting thing. I did want to show you something. There's a lot of talk. I've shown you some things that are kind of unique, but I have one thing that to me is really, really special that I wanted to
Okay.
show, and I'll pull this out here. I showed this I brought it with me to Dayton at the 75th anniversary. I had some other documents that I brought too. Shared it with Jim McCann there just to give him, I thought it would be kind of a nice thing to let him see it. This, to my knowledge, is the first Shopsmith brochure. It was printed in April of 1948. It has graphics on the inside and photographs that were subsequently part of their initial marketing campaigns that appeared in Popular Science, Popular Mechanics magazines in May of 1948. And this is for a 10E. You can see the wooden extension table and some of the other unique features of the early 10E. But yeah, I've never seen another one of these. I don't know. I can't even remember where I
Wow.
found it, but because of its age, it's like I said, I think it is the very first brochure that exists. And like I said, there's just like any of these things, just as soon as you say there's no more of this or this, someone else is going to find one of these. But
Yeah.
for right now, this is the only one that I know that exists. And
As I
it's
think about protecting these, I see your cabinet off to the side there with lights. Are those LED lights? Are you
yeah, most of
concerned
the time,
about UV or anything
yeah,
like
most of the
that?
time I keep these lights off. They're just they sit in the cabinets and things like this. And these documents, I've got binders that I keep all these things in, so that, again, they stay out of light.
Yeah,
And because again, these papers are fairly fragile at this point. I've got some stuff that, like
absolutely.
I said, more than 75 years old, and I just want to make sure it can stick around for a little while. But this kind of a thing I think is really neat. And like I said, I gave Jim a chance to handle it and see it, which I don't often do, but I thought that would be kind of a nice thing to, for a guy who's dedicated so much of his life and is frankly, has been, as one individual, he's consumed a big chunk of Shopsmith history in general, in his tenure with the company. I thought it would be a
Absolutely.
nice thing for him to see it. And he was pretty thrilled. And what's interesting is, the format that they use with that was subsequently borrowed by Magna American Corporation when they were marketing the Goldies that they made at that time. And the same kind of 5-panel format was used in the early days of the Mark V, the Mark V, that Mark V that was done by the Folker
Yeah.
family with Shopsmith Incorporated back in the 70s. So I've got some of those brochures from that era as well. But yeah, they borrowed, pretty liberally from these kind of things.
That is so cool.
So,
Well, John, we've spent a bunch of time, a bunch of
yep,
your time. I
yep.
really appreciate you showing us around. I know that you've got more hidden away. We'll have to follow up with you
Yeah, someday we'll get out of the
later
garage.
date.
I'll show you the machines because I've got, all the full size stuff is down
I
there.
think I need to come to Massachusetts and just bring my camera with me, and we'll do
Uh,
the shop tour then.
yeah, I'd love to head because again, it's great to sort of flip through the pages. We couldn't go through all the details, but there's a
Yeah.
million stories here, some great things to show. Just seeing some of the old manuals and things that you may never actually lay your
Ah,
hands on because it's some of these are hard to find.
that's fantastic. Well,
Yeah,
thank you, John. I
yeah,
really
absolutely.
appreciate your time, and again
Yep.
for opening up this curtain for us. Hopefully the next thing that you're looking for that's been an impossible find, you haven't just created 20 new competitors on eBay. it's it's possible.
Yeah, it's and there's a lot of stuff out there to collect. There's still a lot of things. And I've found a lot of the sometimes you really got to hunt for the rare things now. It's like things.
Yeah.
There's a couple pieces that I know that people have that I'd love to acquire, and maybe I can do some horse trading with somebody someday, and get a couple of those. There's a couple things I'd really love to have in the collection that I don't that I know exist. But
If
I'll keep
somebody wants
searching.
to reach out to you, how could they do that?
Uh, let's see. What would be the best? Gosh, I'm an
You
active
don't want them to
participant.
contact me because I'll never pass them on to you.
Yeah, I have um, I'm an active participant in the 10E group with Facebook, with Shopsmith Owners Group. I'm active there, so it's usually pretty easy to find me in some of these places. So certainly, if people want to reach out, if they want to find out more information, if they want an opinion on something, I'm happy to give them my historical perspective on those things. So that's probably the best way to reach me is through one of those means.
All right, fantastic.
Yeah.
All right, thanks again, John. Anybody, I'd love to see your questions, comments, cheap shots, and if John, if you don't haunt this video comment section, I'll forward some things on to you as the
Absolutely.
curiosity creeps in. All
Very
right,
good.
thanks again. And for those of us watching, we'll just be jealous from here. All
Have a
right,
good night.
make a great day.